Hey, storyteller. One of the most crucial ways to draw readers into your story and keep them there is by showing how your characters feel. However, readers don't want to be told that a character is angry or elated. They want to become angry or elated along with him or her. This deep immersion into the character's head and heart, called deep point of view, is what keeps readers talking about a story long after they finish it. Welcome to this week's writer coaching session, where we'll examine several ways you can help readers experience your character's emotion and ensure that your story has a lasting impact. I'm Bridget from V Squared Writer Coaching, an author, editor, and your story coach, here to help you make your story powerful, polished, and publishable. First, I have a gift for you just for visiting my channel, the Ultimate Guide to Dialogue Punctuation. One of the most common places in which we show character emotion is interspersed between a character's words, within paragraphs of dialogue, or between his or her thoughts. But if we don't format these paragraphs correctly, readers can become confused as to which parts are the character's spoken words, which parts are thoughts, and which are actions. And if you confuse readers, you lose readers. This easy-to-follow guide will walk you through all the grammar rules associated with dialogue, thoughts, interruptions, etc., so you can craft dialogue and actions that keep readers focused on what's happening in the story and how your character feels, instead of on errors you might be accidentally creating in the dialogue. Just click the link in the description or visit b2writercoaching.com/dialogue. That's the letter B, the number 2, writercoaching.com/dialogue. And be sure to stick around to the end of this video so you won't miss this week's Power Up, a super practical action step you can use in your story right now. If you've been writing or studying the craft of writing for any time, you've probably run across the saying, show, don't tell. What does this mean? Well, it means that we want to actually show the reader with the character's actions and interactions, dialogue, description, how the character feels, or other aspects of the story, rather than just point blank telling the reader what we want to convey. In terms of character emotion, there are several levels that can take us from telling the reader how the character feels to showing the reader and helping the reader experience that emotion with the character. The first 2 levels that we'll look at today are types of telling. The last 2 are showing. So let's check those out. Level 1 involves stating the emotion outright, or using ly adverbs that do so. This is telling at its most blatant. I often call this emotion naming as a sort of shorthand for it. Here are a couple of examples. She was too frightened to speak. Notice we're using the weak verb was there to connect she and frightened. There's no action in this sentence. Frightened is naming the emotion outright. Here's another example, which is even worse. Who are you? She asked fearfully. Well, we have some dialogue there, and we see her stammering, which indicates either nervousness or something else going on with the character, but she asked fearfully. Fearfully is an ly adverb that also names her emotion. Level 2 is a little better, but it's still telling. This occurs when we pair the named emotion with a physical sensation. For example, fear clogged her throat. Well, this is figurative language, and we know that fear isn't physical, so it can't really clog her throat. What happens is her throat closes up because she's afraid. While this is a little more creative, it's still telling. We're still naming that emotion. We're saying to the reader that she was afraid. We do have a little bit of internal physical response going on, but it's cliche and it's not very descriptive. So let's look at level 3. Here we get into showing the emotion through body language or internal physical response, and in this example, we're going to show the character's fear. She backed away, her constricted throat closing off the scream building inside it. This example conveys a similar concept to the level 2 example in which fear clogged her throat. This time, though, we're showing the internal physical response, her throat closed up. First, we have body language, she backed away. That indicates she doesn't want to be near whatever it is she's backing away from. And then her body does something involuntary, her throat closed up. Her constricted throat also closes off a scream that was building. So we can see that she wants to scream, but she's so frightened that she can't even do that. This harkens back to our first example for level 1, where she was too frightened to even speak. Here, it's even more powerful because she can't even scream. but we are using an internal physical response to show this. In level 4, we're going to use a metaphor for the emotion through the use of setting, description, and word choice during the character's action. In this way, the reader truly shares the character's fear. As a side note, a metaphor is a word or phrase that is used to describe something to which it is normally not related, in order to suggest a resemblance and increase the power of the description. Metaphors evoke emotion in the reader and can give an ordinary story element an extraordinary meaning. What do I mean by all this? Well, let's look at an example. As she backed away, cold air from the vent above whispered down her neck. Now here, we don't have her body necessarily doing anything. She is backing away, so that is body language. But instead of the internal physical response, we have a part of the setting contributing to the mood. Cold air. We often think of cold in relation to fear or something scary, and the cold air whispered down the back of her neck. If you can imagine a person whispering and their breath touching the back of your neck, it gives you that chill type feeling. And it creates an image of discomfort, probably extreme discomfort. So this is a metaphor because it's relating fear to the cold air from the vent. Now, a vent isn't dangerous. It's not going to cause her any harm. And that air is soft, and whispering you might think of as a soft sound, but it's not just the sound, it's the sensation down the back of her neck. This makes us feel her fear with her. Then if she asks the question, stammering, who are you? That emphasizes the fear even more. So we can pair the action beat with the dialogue. If you're not sure what an action beat is, those are sentences of character action that are interspersed between a character's dialogue in the same paragraph. The Ultimate Guide to Dialogue Punctuation will show you more about that. For the purposes of today's writer coaching session, we're going to mostly be focusing on level 3, where we use body language or internal physical response, but we'll also touch on using setting and character interactions with it to show emotion. As a helpful clue to determine whether you're telling or showing the character's emotion, examine whether the wording is including the character's physical or mental response to that emotion. If it isn't, it's probably telling, and I would suggest revising it. For the first category of tips we're going to explore today, we'll look at using the character's body language, internal physical responses, and actions to convey emotion. Here are a few definitions to get us started. When we talk about actions, I'm referring to outward expressions of the character's emotion through that person's movements, interactions with the setting, and other types of action. Here's an example. She wrapped the blanket tighter around her shoulders. A character might also throw a book across the room, or slump into a chair, slam a door. You get the picture. Body language refers to anything the character does with his or her body in response to the emotion. This is usually voluntary or on purpose. The character usually knows he or she is doing this, but sometimes these can be involuntary actions as well. These are outward actions that any character can see if they're observing. The character may roll her eyes, he may square his shoulders, wringing the hands, crossing her arms, shaking her head, etc. Internal physical responses occur when part of the character's body responds to the emotion involuntarily. This is the throat closing up, heart pounding, a chill running down her back, breaking out into a cold sweat. You might say, well, that's external. Sort of, yes, and sometimes the other characters may be able to see it, but it is an involuntary reaction caused by an internal response. Most often, internal physical responses are not visible to other characters. Now, a character may blush, and that is both internal and external in the way that other characters can see that happen, and it is an involuntary action. What's the advantage to using action, body language, and internal physical responses to convey emotion? Well, they all move the story forward in that they convey motion either within the character, if it's internal physical responses, or the character moving through the setting and interacting with it. Or it could be the character is simply moving his or her body, making a gesture, shaking her head, things like that. But it does indicate movement. That keeps the reader grounded in what's happening in the story outside the character's head, and often will relate to the plot, especially if it's an interaction with the setting or an action. A character might rush outside and slam the door and take off on his motorcycle. Well, this character's probably angry or upset in some way, and that can move the plot forward because where is he going to end up as he drives his motorcycle? What's going to happen? These methods keep the reader grounded in the setting, keep the characters moving, provide an action piece for a scene that may otherwise not have one, and keep the characters active rather than passive. Depending on whether you're showing the emotions of your viewpoint character or a different character, you'll need to consider several things. For a viewpoint character, you can show actions and interactions with the setting, like he slammed his fist on the table. Show body language that is not visible to other characters, like he stiffened, ground his teeth, clenched his jaw. I consider these body language, not internal physical responses, because it's not the body doing something internally on its own as a response to the emotion. The character is actually doing these things voluntarily. You can also show body language that is visible to other characters. For instance, he clenched his hand into a fist, crossed his arms, rubbed the back of his neck, etc. But what if we're trying to show the emotions of a different character who is not the viewpoint character? This means we're not in this character's head for this scene. We still want to show the emotions, so we need to make sure whatever we're using is visible to our viewpoint character. If the viewpoint character can't see it, hear it, or experience it, neither can the reader. How do we do this? You can use outward or visible body language, actions, and interactions with the setting. Do not show body language that isn't visible to the viewpoint character. If you're writing in first person or third person limited, the reader can only experience what the viewpoint character experiences. Here are a couple of examples. What not to do: she stiffened. This implies the character is feeling this happened. It's an internal physical response. However, an example that does work: her posture grew rigid, or her shoulders formed a rigid line. Your viewpoint character can see this happening. Do not show internal physical responses or pair body language with the character's thought or perceptions. You could do these things for a viewpoint character, but keep in mind we're not in the non-viewpoint character's head, so we can't know what that person's thinking or what their perception of a situation is. Are you finding this helpful so far? If so, consider clicking the like button so YouTube will show this video to more writers like you. For our second group of tips, we're going to explore how to use a character's words and thoughts to show emotion. Your ultimate guide to dialogue punctuation will come in really handy for this part. We can use strong dialogue or internal monologue, which is a character's thoughts, that conveys or hints at the emotion. For an example of dialogue, "Oh, sure, give the tickets to her." You see the emphasis on her there that indicates this character is not happy about this situation. An example of internal monologue: "I see." That's dialogue. Here is your internal monologue or your thought in italics. "He chose Sarah after everything I've done for him." Both of these examples convey the same sentiment. This character is not happy the guy gave his tickets to this other girl. We may infer that there's some jealousy going on here. And each of these versions can be quite powerful and valid, just depending on what the scene needs and what your personal style preferences are. We can also use contrasting dialogue or tone. Dialogue that contradicts the character's internal response or body language can be a powerful clue to emotion. This is called subtext. This is powerful because we often say the opposite of how we feel to mask our true emotions. If this is not a viewpoint character whose emotion you're trying to convey, you can use appearance. And for any character, you can use action and setting to create a mood that shows the character's true feelings. Here's an example. "If that's what you want," he said, softening his voice, but the steel in his eyes turned to flint. The sparks they fired off could set a forest ablaze. In this example, the character is saying, "Okay, fine, if that's what you want," and he softens his voice so he doesn't sound angry, but the expression in his eyes tells the viewpoint character all she needs to know. He's not a happy camper. You could just as easily use actions or other types of body language, like a clenched fist or something else, to convey the emotion the character's trying to hide with mild dialogue. For our third group of tips, we're going to look at how to use setting and description to convey character emotion. Use strong descriptive verbs that hint at or contrast the mood. These are active verbs, so they're active and descriptive. For example, "He trudged across the pristine lawn." Well, you might be thinking if he's in a really bad mood or whatever emotion he's experiencing, trudged doesn't contrast that emotion, it conveys it. Yes, that's true. And notice how trudged is very descriptive of how he's walking. He's not just walking across the lawn. It's a slow, almost painful type of walking. Like it takes extreme effort to make himself move. This conveys a negative emotion or exhaustion or something similar. The contrasting description here is the pristine lawn. This lawn is beautiful and well kept and in prime condition, and yet his mood is very much the opposite of that. So, pairing trudged and the description of the lawn shows the contrast of the setting to his mood. Caution though, even using strong descriptive verbs to mask emotion naming is still telling. Remember our example, fear clogged her throat? Well, clogged is pretty descriptive, but we're still naming the fear. This is level 2 and still a form of telling. Here are a couple more examples. Guilt slammed into him. Really? Like a freight train? Like a wall? Anger strangled her. Fear shot through his heart. When we look at these all together like this, we can see that this really is weaker writing. We can also use specific setting details as part of the action that mirror or contrast the emotion. A cold wind, dark skies, or a messy room can reflect a character's foul mood. A perfect spring day can contrast a character's depressed mood. Singing birds can create a discordant sound that hurts the character's ears. In one episode of the popular TV series Yellowstone, we find an excellent example of this. One of the characters, who is, well, easily angered, had just gotten in an argument with someone or was at least upset with this person, and so she walks outside to sit on the porch and brood. She's sitting there, and this lovely wind chime starts tinkling nearby. It's hanging from the roof of the porch, and she glares at it for a moment, and then she gets up and walks inside. The door bangs behind her. She comes back out with a rifle. She shoots the wind chime because it was contrasting her mood so badly that she couldn't stand it. And she sits down, lays the gun next to her, and a bird starts singing nearby. Well, she shoots the bird too. So we can see that the setting in this case was contrasting her mood, and she decided to do something about that. Just as a quick reminder, if you haven't done so already, be sure to download your ultimate guide to dialogue punctuation. Remember, just click the link in the description or visit b2writercoaching.com/dialogue. Now let's look at today's power-up. For a scene in your story that needs a bit more character emotion, use the following techniques to ramp up or include the feelings of your viewpoint character and at least one other who isn't a viewpoint character. Show the viewpoint character's emotion by using setting details or metaphors to mirror or contrast the emotion, using strong dialogue or internal monologue, using internal physical responses or reactions, and non-visible body language. To show any character's emotion, including the viewpoint character or others, you can do the following. Use strong, descriptive verbs that hint at or contrast the emotion. Use appearance if it's a non-viewpoint character, and if it's any character, use body language and or action. 2 types of words are notorious for creating telling and diluting the power of the emotions you're trying to convey. Filter words and ly adverbs. Watch these 2 videos to find out how to avoid and replace them. And let's power up your storytelling.